She didn't cry out, not when it struck, not when her body flinched against the pole and the air was punched from her lungs. Her silence was complete, hollow, practiced, terrifying in its depth, but the crowd screamed for her. Whore! Womb waster! She denied the cause! The words slammed into her harder than the stones, each syllable a condemnation fired from behind sneering lips. The insults poured over her like boiling oil, thick and relentless, curdling in the air as the wind funneled their fury through the narrow alleys of the sector. It was the same every day, until it wasn't. Rivael hung from rusted iron chains bolted into the post that loomed in the center of the human quarter. She had been there for days. Her arms stretched above her, bound tight, wrists swollen around steel cuffs that tore at her skin whenever she shifted. Her ankles were shackled too, though she lacked the strength to move much at all now. Flies clung lazily to the wounds on her legs, feeding off old blood and dying skin. Her head drooped forward, tangled strands of red hair sticking to her bruised face. She had once kept that hair braided, a symbol of her lineage, of quiet pride. Now it hung matted and filthy. Her deep blue skin bore the stains of filth, sweat, and dried blood. Dirt darkened the creases around her eyes, her lips, her collarbone. One of her ribs jutted visibly beneath the torn fabric that barely clung to her frame. She hadn't eaten in 4 days. She hadn't drunk water in 2, and yet she stayed silent. She had always been that way, quiet, not weak, never that, but composed, still. Even before the war, she had kept herself apart, not out of pride, but purpose. She had once painted delicate glass canvases etched with light-reactive pigments displayed across the dome pavilions of the inner districts. Her name had carried weight then. Rivael of Theras Kell, born of the Winter Line, inheritor of the gene thread of the Starborn. Then the war came. Then the directive followed, the Restoration Directive, a sterile term for an unthinkable program. After the collapse of her species' population centers and the death of millions, the ruling caste announced a radical plan. Genetically viable females would be conscripted into state-controlled breeding programs. There would be no choice, no variance. The future demanded sacrifice. She had not fought them. She had not run. She had simply looked into the face of the warden and said, no. And for that, they tore her life apart. Her records were purged, her name erased from all systems, her assets seized, her studio collapsed, her younger sister gone. She never found out what happened to her. They stripped her of her status and dumped her body here, in the human sector, chained like a feral beast to the display post. A warning, she had denied the cause. And so they made her a spectacle. Every morning since, people came. Some were human, some not. But all looked. Some threw garbage. Others spat. A few children had learned to aim their pebbles well. It was a game. Hit the blue witch. Score a point. She didn't flinch anymore. Her body had grown used to the pain. Her soul had not. But she kept it buried, hidden behind violet eyes, dulled by hunger, thirst, and quiet humiliation. The worst were the women. Whore, womb waster, starborn filth. She refused her duty. The irony was never lost on her. They called it duty, called it sacred, and yet here she was, barely clothed, starved, defiled in public by word and gesture and thrown object, and no one called that shameful. Rivael, the once adored artisan of the upper rings, now served as nothing but a warning flag, bound in rust and disgrace. And then, he stopped. The human man. He hadn't meant to. That much was clear. He was tall, rough-looking, with shoulders broad from work and hands stained black with oil. A jacket too worn to be new, too clean to be discarded, hung from his frame. His boots were thick-soled, meant for industrial service. He looked like every other dockhand in the city. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the wind shifting just enough to reveal her face, or the sound her chains made, light, almost pathetic. Maybe it was the way her body no longer even tried to stand upright, like her bones had given up. Or maybe it was the way no one else paused. No one else looked. His name was Kalen Ward, and he was not a hero. He had been an engineer in the Interstellar Navy. He'd fixed machines that dropped bombs on entire settlements. Things that glowed hot and silenced screams a continent away. He had built weapons, calibrated them, sent them to war. He never knew the names of the people on the other end. After the armistice, he ran, or more precisely, he buried himself in rust, in work, in silence. But this woman, this scene felt like something he had seen before, and it felt wrong. He stepped off the street. The crowd didn't care. They barely noticed. A few sneered. One man nudged his companion and laughed. Kalen walked forward slowly. His boots echoed against the metal plating beneath him. She didn't look up, not at first. Up close, she looked even worse. Her skin was cracking at the edges of her mouth. Blood had dried in black lines down her thighs. Her shoulders were scraped raw where the chains had dug in. But what struck him hardest was the stillness. She wasn't unconscious. She was waiting for death. He crouched in front of her, slowly, like one might approach a wounded animal. "Hey." No response. "I won't hurt you." Still nothing. He reached into his coat and pulled out a dented metal flask. The cap twisted off with a faint squeak. He raised it toward her lips. She didn't move, but her breath caught. He saw it, just a twitch in the corner of her mouth. Her cracked lips parted slightly. He held the flask steady. She drank, a small sip, then another. Her throat convulsed as the water slid down and her entire body trembled. A single tear broke from the corner of one violet eye, unnoticed by her but not by him. Kalen swallowed. He didn't speak again. He just stood. And that's when he saw the cuffs. Thick, heavy, corroded, state-issued, military precision. The kind of tech meant to hold people far stronger than she. The plaque behind her was written in a language he couldn't read. He didn't need to. It screamed the truth in rust, blood, and neglect. She wasn't a criminal. She was a statement. He looked around. No guards, no patrols. Just people walking by like this was another billboard. He drew in a breath, then opened the satchel at his belt. Inside was the same toolkit he'd used to patch carrier hulls mid-orbit. He rolled it out with a flick of his wrist. Micro cutter, heat torch, spike clamp. "Why are you doing this?" he asked himself under his breath. His hands were already moving. The torch sparked to life with a hiss. A faint orange glow lit the shadowed alley. She twitched, not in fear, but in memory. She was used to pain. She braced for it, not realizing the light was coming to free her, not brand her again. He knelt beside her wrist and placed the cutter at the lock's edge. The metal fought him. The lock cracked. He caught her arm as it dropped, then her ankle. The chain hissed, spat, then gave way. Her body sagged. He caught her before she hit the floor. She was so light it scared him, so fragile, so alive. He lifted her gently, one arm under her knees, the other around her shoulders. Her head lolled against his chest. Her breath was ragged but present. People watched. Some turned away. No one stopped him. Kalen Ward looked down at the broken girl in his arms and made a decision, not with fire, not with anger, but with quiet finality. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered, and he carried her away. The door hissed shut behind them. It was an old door, manual, warped slightly at the frame from too many years of grit and temperature shifts, but it still locked. Kalen turned the bolt with a satisfying click and stood there a moment, listening to the quiet hum of the ventilation unit overhead. No voices, no stones, no judgment, only silence. He shifted his weight, adjusting the motionless figure in his arms. Rivael hadn't stirred since he lifted her from the post. Her limbs remained limp, her head nestled lightly against his collarbone, a faint shiver occasionally passing through her fragile frame. She was breathing, but shallowly, as if her body feared that even the effort of breath might be too much to give. The room was small, a single square of space crammed with a sleeping cot, a low metal workbench covered in tools, a rust-streaked sink, and a dull glowing heater unit tucked into the wall. Everything smelled of oil and heat and dust. But it was clean, safe. He knelt beside the cot and slowly lowered her down, careful not to jar her already battered body. She didn't react. Her hands lay open on the thin blanket, blue fingers slack and bruised, the cuffs having left deep welts at the wrists. Her ankles were worse, swollen and scabbed, the skin torn raw from rusted metal. He stood again and watched her for a long moment. Rivael. That was her name. He didn't know how he knew it. She hadn't told him, not yet. But it was there, carved into her in a way no erasure could touch. A name strong enough to survive being stripped from official records, burned off ID tags, and spat on by strangers. She wasn't just a victim. That much was clear to him now. And yet lying there, she barely looked alive. Kalen moved to the sink, turning on the tap until lukewarm water trickled out. He soaked a cloth, wrung it out, and returned to her side. He started at her face, wiping away grime, dried blood, sweat. Her skin, though darkened by days in the heat, held a faint iridescence beneath the dirt, a softness, a glow that spoke of a body meant for beauty, not punishment. She stirred faintly at the touch but didn't pull away. Her lips parted slightly, cracked from thirst, and her eyes fluttered once, then closed again. "You're safe," he murmured, unsure whether the words were for her or himself. A blinking red light from the corner of the room caught his eye. His comm unit, plugged into the wall, was flashing with an alert. Probably another citywide broadcast, maybe a curfew update or a security notice. He ignored it. He wasn't interested in what the city had to say, not tonight. Instead, he retrieved his old med kit from under the cot. Military issue, mostly depleted, but it still had what he needed: salve for burns, synth skin patches, antibacterial spray. He worked in silence, patching her wounds gently, cleaning her ankles with slow, careful motions. She twitched once when the disinfectant touched exposed flesh, but made no sound. The quiet wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Outside the window, the night moaned with the usual sounds of the lower sectors. Static-laced announcements, the rattle of a patrol drone passing by, distant shouting. But in here, it was still. He paused to look at her again. Her breathing had steadied slightly. Her chest rose and fell in a gentler rhythm now. The lines in her brow had smoothed. She was healing. Slowly. Barely. But it was something. Kalen leaned back against the wall, arms folded, gaze fixed on the woman sleeping on his cot. Why had he helped her? He asked himself that again. Because no one else did? Because it was wrong? Because something in her silence had sounded too much like his own? He didn't know. But he remembered too clearly the last city he'd served in during the war. Remembered the orders, the silence in the radio before the buildings fell, the screams, the heat. He remembered standing in a hallway of steel, eyes locked on a reflection in a polished panel, unable to recognize the man looking back. And now here he was, breaking an unspoken rule by helping a null-class alien woman, a genetically valuable fugitive condemned for disobedience. By now there were probably warrants posted, drones rerouted, officials informed. But none of that felt real. Only she did. And she was here, on his cot, in his room, in his world now. He stayed up through the night. At some point she stirred again. A faint sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a whimper. Kalen moved to her side, not touching, just watching. Her eyes opened. Barely. A single sliver of violet met his gaze, uncertain, unfocused. Her voice, dry as sand, cracked through the silence. "Where?" she whispered. He leaned forward slightly. "You're safe. I brought you here." Her eyes moved to the ceiling, then back to him. She didn't speak again. "I'll get you water." He returned moments later with the flask. He helped her sit up, supporting her back with one arm. She was impossibly light, as if the air inside her was still deciding whether to stay. He pressed the flask to her lips. She drank, not greedily, not even fully, just enough to wet her mouth. But this time, as he lowered the flask, her fingers, trembling, weak, briefly touched his wrist. Not to push him away, just to make contact. He looked down at her hand, then at her face. She had turned slightly, her violet eyes open now, gazing at him with something behind the exhaustion. Not gratitude, not yet. Recognition. As if, in some distant place beneath all the pain, she remembered what it meant to be seen. Kalen felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't speak, didn't reach for her again. Just stood and returned the flask to the sink. Later, he slid down against the wall beside the cot. He closed his eyes, resting without sleep. The night dragged on. At some point, the announcement system outside the window kicked to life. Harsh and cold and bureaucratic. A monotone voice echoed through the district. Reminder: all citizens are expected to report suspected null-class fugitives. Harboring genetic defectors is punishable under directive law. He ignored it. Didn't even look up. Because the woman in his bed wasn't a fugitive. She wasn't defective. She had just said no. And that word, in this world, was the most dangerous thing anyone could say. When morning came, he would figure out what to do next. But for now, he watched the first hints of light creep through the slats of the window, brushing over her skin like the city was remembering what softness looked like. He looked at her, truly looked. And with quiet certainty, he whispered into the stillness, "You're not going back there." And meant every word. The first thing she noticed when she woke again was the silence. Not the kind found in a vacuum or the stillness that follows pain, but something warmer, closer, the sound of metal not screaming, the absence of boots, of commands barked over crackling comms, no electric hum of scanning beams, no gloating laughter, just silence, and the soft rhythm of someone breathing nearby. Rivael opened her eyes slowly. The light leaking through the slats of the window was dim and golden, filtered through city dust and grime, casting patterns on the floor. She blinked into the quiet, her vision adjusting to the gentle blur of morning. For a moment she didn't move, just listened. Then she turned her head. Kalen sat on a low stool beside the workbench. He was hunched over a circuit panel, methodically checking wires with the tip of a multi-tool. He hadn't noticed her stir. His focus was steady, movements exact, hands that had been trained to repair things under pressure, in motion, without luxury or time. His face was calm, not peaceful exactly, but grounded, real. She studied him in silence. The last person to look at her like she mattered had worn a silver collar and smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. That had been a long time ago. Rivael shifted beneath the blanket. Her body protested immediately. Tight aches in her joints, a fire-like sting in her shoulders and thighs. She gritted her teeth, sat up anyway. Kalen looked up the moment he heard the movement. "You're awake," he said, standing. She nodded slowly. Her throat was dry, words reluctant to form. He retrieved the flask and handed it to her without a word. She drank, slowly, carefully. The water was metallic and warm, but it settled something inside her that had been hollow for too long. When she handed the flask back, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. "How do you feel?" he asked. Rivael considered the question. Her body still hurt, her mind still spun, but the air didn't carry the scent of rot and fear, and the chains were gone. "Lighter," she whispered. It wasn't quite true, but it was close enough. He nodded once and moved to the corner of the room, returning with a ration packet. He set it on the crate beside her cot. "Not much, but it'll help." She took it, unwrapped it carefully, and studied the contents before taking a bite. The texture was strange, dense and bitter, but she didn't complain. Hunger softened the taste. Kalen leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely over his chest. They sat in silence for a while, not tense, just still. "I used to work with light," she said suddenly, without looking at him. He raised an eyebrow. "Glass, pigment-reactive polymers. I used to blend color into light structures, art, some called it." Her fingers hovered over the ration pack, twitching slightly. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "Because you still remember," Kalen said. A small, bitter smile played at the corner of her mouth. "Memories feel like lies when there's no one left to share them." He didn't reply. He knew better than to try and soften a truth that raw. Outside, the city groaned awake, distant trams, buzzing neon. Somewhere overhead, the intercom grid crackled to life and spat out its daily command in 3 languages. "All citizens are reminded. Harboring null-class fugitives is a violation of Intersector Directive Law. Report all suspicious activity to the Restoration Council for unity, for survival." Rivael flinched at the sound. She didn't mean to, but her shoulders folded slightly inward, the motion automatic. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cot. Kalen crossed the room in 2 steps and shut the window slats tight. The voice disappeared. She exhaled shakily. "I can't sleep with it in my ears," she admitted. "That voice, that calm. They make it sound like logic," Kalen said. "Like all this is just necessary." "Necessary," she echoed. "That's what they called the post." He didn't ask what she meant. He remembered well enough what she'd looked like when he found her there. Bent, broken, barely breathing. "Do you regret pulling me off it?" she asked after a pause. Her voice was quiet but clear. Kalen met her eyes without hesitation. "No." "Even if they come?" "They will, eventually. And you'll be marked too." "I've already been marked," he said. "I just stopped letting it show." She looked at him longer this time, something new in her gaze. Less guarded, more curious. "You don't act like the others," she said softly. "I don't feel like them." "Why?" "Because I saw what the war did," he said, voice low. "Not just to cities and ships, but to people. People became efficient, cold. They stopped seeing what they were destroying. And I let them. I fixed the machines that broke bones and tore skin. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, jaw tight. And now I fix small things. Scrap, docking clamps, things that don't scream when they fall apart. Rivael looked down at her hands. Slowly, she flexed her fingers. The color had returned a little. Not much, but enough. I don't know what comes next, she admitted. You don't have to, he said. Not yet. A long pause. Do you think it ever really stops? The shame, the silence? He stepped closer, not to crowd her, just to be present. I don't know, he said, but I think it gets easier if someone's willing to listen. Rivael's breath caught. For a moment, she looked like she might speak again, but instead, she reached out. Her fingers touched the edge of his sleeve, not gripping, just resting, not for safety, not to plead, just to remember what contact felt like. Kaylin didn't move. She closed her eyes. Outside, the world kept turning. The banners kept floating. The warnings kept repeating. But in that small, rusted room, between one broken person and another, the noise couldn't quite get in. And for the first time in longer than she could measure, Rivael allowed herself to lean, just slightly, toward the warmth beside her. Not toward the future, but toward now. And for now, it was enough. The tension in the air didn't come from sirens or weapons or marching boots. It came from something quieter, heavier, like the pressure before a summer storm, when the sky forgets how to breathe and even the walls seem to hold their breath. Rivael felt it before Kaylin said a word. She stood barefoot by the window, watching the sky bruise into dusk. Her red hair hung loose down her back, still tangled in places, but clean now. Her arms had regained some of their shape, less bone, more will. But there were still nights she woke gasping, still hours she disappeared into herself. This wasn't one of those hours. Something's wrong, she said without turning. Kaylin looked up from the workbench where a data relay unit sparked quietly in his hands. He didn't ask how she knew. They're circling tighter, he replied. The last 2 drone sweeps came within 10 meters. That's not patrol. That's search behavior. Rivael's jaw clenched. She said nothing, but her body shifted. Shoulders rolling, arms folding. Not in fear, in readiness. She hadn't asked about escape again since the night he told her there was a way out. She hadn't asked if they'd have to run, only when. Still, they'd waited, hoping perhaps that the system would forget. That silence could hide them. But hope had limits in this city. A sharp sound broke the stillness. 3 measured knocks against the metal outer door. Not fists, not weapons. Just official, like a declaration. Kaylin didn't move. Not yet. The knocks came again, slower this time, deliberate. He turned toward her. Go! Rivael's eyes met his. I'm not hiding, she said, calm, clear. They're not here to talk. I know. Then get in the crawl space. Now. Her lips pressed together, anger flashing briefly behind her gaze. But she nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she trusted him. She moved to the back wall, pulled aside the floor grate, and slipped beneath. Her movements were silent, precise. She didn't flinch as the panel clicked shut over her. And then he was alone. The door hissed open. 3 men stepped inside, 2 armored enforcers flanking a thin, smooth-faced officer in a charcoal uniform. His gloves were spotless. His smile was razor-thin. Mr. Ward, he said, dockside engineer, retired, current residence, subsector Delta 9, Unit 34-22. May we come in? You already did, Kaylin answered. The officer laughed softly, as if enjoying a private joke. We've been reviewing some visual logs, he said, pulling a sleek data stick from his coat. It appears you were in close contact with a registered null-class fugitive 3 nights ago. Female. High-priority genetics. Classified non-compliant. Currently flagged for retrieval. Kaylin said nothing. Have you seen her? The officer asked, voice polite. Still nothing. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. You know, under directive law, harboring a class null is treason. But we're not here to make this difficult. If you cooperate, we can ensure your record remains intact. No tribunals, no detainment. He paused. After all, I'm sure you were only trying to help. These creatures can be very convincing. Kaylin's voice was low, steady. She's not a creature. The officer arched a brow. She refused the directive, Kaylin continued. She said no. That doesn't make her subhuman. The 2 enforcers behind him tensed. I see, the officer said, smile gone. So you're a sympathizer? No, Kaylin said. I'm a man who's done watching people be broken in the name of survival. The officer stepped forward. You think you're making a statement, but all you're doing is delaying the inevitable. I'm not delaying anything, Kalen replied. I'm buying time. The moment the words left his mouth, the enforcer on the right moved. Fast, but not faster than the grate in the floor exploding open. Rivael surged up like a second breath of fire. The first enforcer reached for his weapon, but her hand was already on his arm, twisting it hard. A sharp cry, a crunch, and the man dropped to the floor. The second reached to subdue her. Too slow. Kalen was there, slamming him into the wall with a brutal shoulder check. Metal cracked, sparks flew. The man crumpled. The officer took one step back. You've just made this a Class 3 offense, he hissed. Rivael stood tall. Her breath came hard but steady. Her arms were bare, bruises faded but not gone. Her eyes violet and vivid, burned with something raw. I won't be caged again, she said. And then from outside, another sound. Not a scream, not a siren, a click. Someone in the hallway had taken a photo. A door opened, then a window, then another. For the first time in weeks, the street wasn't silent. Kalen turned slowly toward the doorway. People were watching, not rushing in, not helping, but watching, present. The officer stepped back, fury creeping into his posture. This won't stop anything. You've only delayed judgment. Maybe, Kalen said, or maybe you just showed them what you really are. The officer retreated. No parting words, no last threat, just silence and the closing of a door. Then they were alone. Rivael let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking slightly. Kalen moved toward her but stopped a foot away. Are you all right? She nodded, then looked at him, truly looked. You stood between me and them, she said. I would again. Her gaze softened, just slightly. Why? Kalen didn't smile, didn't soften. He just answered honestly. Because I'd rather lose everything than watch you be silenced again. Outside, someone said her name. Not an insult, not a curse, just her name, Rivael. She turned to the window. They were still watching. But not with judgment. With something else. Something that might one day become courage. And she didn't look away. The silence after the confrontation was heavier than the shouting would have been. Hours had passed since the enforcers had left. Kalen had locked the door, reset the dampener, and swept the floor clean of shattered tools and scuffed blood. But none of that stopped the weight pressing down on the room. Rivael sat on the cot, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring at nothing. Her eyes weren't hollow. They were burning, quiet, controlled, but dangerous. Kalen watched her from across the room, unsure if now was the time to speak or if silence would serve better. He'd learned the difference most days, but this time it was different. She hadn't said a word since they'd fought side by side. Now she was wrapped in herself, like armor made from stillness. He tried carefully. You didn't have to come out. I had it. You didn't, she said immediately. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut cleanly. I knew what they were, she continued. I knew what they would do, but I didn't know what you would do. I couldn't sit beneath the floor and wonder if you'd be the next name deleted off a wall. Kalen took a slow breath. I would have stood, he said. I didn't want you to have to. That hit harder than anything else had. Her arms dropped from around her knees. She stood, not fast but steady. The motion was coiled, the kind of tension that came after battle, not during. The body still braced for something that had already passed. She walked toward him, then stopped. She wasn't shaking. She was angry. At him, at the world, at herself. I didn't survive all of this to sit quietly in a box while someone else burned for me, she said. I'm not a symbol. I'm not your cause. You're not, he said, calm but firm. You look at me like I'm something to protect. You are. Her voice cracked then, just a little. I don't want to be. Silence. She turned away, hands pressed to her face. Kalen crossed the room slowly, stopped just behind her, and spoke softly. You don't have to be anything you don't want to. Not for me, not for them, not ever again. Her shoulders sagged. She didn't cry, but her breath hitched like something inside her was giving way. And then she turned and stepped into him, not stumbled, stepped. She placed her hands on his chest and rested her forehead just under his collarbone. He wrapped his arms around her without a word. She didn't tremble. She didn't fall apart. She simply stayed there, in the circle of his body, breathing like she'd forgotten how. Time passed. The light outside the slatted window turned red with sunset. The shadow stretched across the wall, softening everything. The heater clicked softly in the background. "You scare me," she whispered into his shirt. Kalen stilled. "Why?" "Because I almost believe you." He pulled back just enough to look at her. "Believe what?" "That I'm not alone anymore." He reached up and gently touched her face, brushing aside a strand of her red hair. "You're not," he said. And when their lips met, it wasn't urgent. It was slow, earnest, not to possess, not to consume, just to say, "I'm here." Her hand slid up around his neck, fingers brushing the base of his skull. His breath caught in his chest, and he kissed her again, deeper this time, but still careful, like neither of them wanted to break the moment. When they parted, their foreheads touched, and for a long while they said nothing. They didn't need to. Later, she lay beside him on the cot, head against his shoulder, the blanket pulled lightly over them. The night outside hummed with static and wind, but inside the room, the storm had passed. "You still don't know what comes next," he said quietly. "No," she whispered, "but I want to find out." Kalen turned to her, his hand resting over hers. "So do I." She smiled, not wide, not certain, but real. The storm came quietly, no alarms, no marching boots, no sharp screams of warning, only stillness. Then pressure, a kind of weight in the air, invisible but undeniable, the way the world tenses just before something breaks. Kalen felt it before he saw anything. He was working under the table with a micro drill, fixing the ventilation panel that always buzzed when the system overclocked, when the lights flickered once, just once, and a subtle whine rose from the hallway floor. He froze. Not the power failing, not the heater cycling. A proximity drone. His eyes snapped to the vent readout. Heat signature, 3 bodies, unregistered. No comm pings, military-grade silencer field active. They were already here. "Rivael." She looked up from the other side of the room where she'd been carefully folding the blanket. Her face tensed immediately. Kalen stood, calm and fast. "You need to hide. Storage hatch, lower level. You know where?" Her jaw set. "No. You have to. I won't leave you out here alone." There wasn't time to argue. He tossed her the emergency comm dampener, and she caught it in one hand, slipping it under the panel floor. She moved quickly, quiet as breath, but her posture was tense, coiled. She was stronger now, no longer trembling with every movement. The marks on her wrists had begun to fade, but fire still lingered in her eyes. They waited. The knock wasn't soft this time. 4 firm hits, measured, official. Kalen didn't move. He glanced at Rivael once. She gave a single nod and dropped silently into the crawl space beneath the floor. The panel clicked into place. Then the door slid open. They didn't wait for permission. 3 figures entered in staggered formation, 2 in sleek black enforcer armor, weapons magnet clamped to their backs, and a third in dark civilian uniform. Not high rank, but not a foot soldier. A bureaucrat with blood behind the smile. "Kalen Ward," the man said smoothly, stepping forward. "Dockside mechanic. Civilian permit code 448 Zeta, formerly fleet engineer under the Unified Peace Corps." Kalen said nothing. He stood in the center of the room, hands relaxed, eyes unmoved. The man smiled wider. "You've been identified via visual records interacting with a null-class fugitive 3 days ago. Matching genetic flags suggest she's the failed subject from Sector 7. Statute 9.6 allows for your detainment, but we'd prefer cooperation." Still no response. Behind the man, one of the armored enforcers slowly circled the room, scanning walls, checking vents. The third kept his eye on Kalen, hand drifting closer to the grip of his stun-pulse sidearm. The bureaucrat let out a low, theatrical sigh. "Mr. Ward, we understand how persuasive these null-class deviants can be. Some of them retain traits, appearance, voice, scent, that make them difficult to resist. It's not your fault. They were designed that way, engineered for attraction, for obedience." Kalen's jaw flexed. "Is that what you tell yourself when they scream?" The man blinked, smile faltering slightly, then he recovered. "They're not people. They're resources." Kalen took a step forward. "She's not yours to take. She's not yours to keep." The enforcer behind him shifted, tension rising. "She said no," Kalen continued, "and for that you tried to erase her. She's dangerous, disobedient, defective. She's alive." The bureaucrat's smile returned, colder this time. "Not for long if you don't comply." The threat lingered in the air. Behind the wall, Rivael's heart beat like a war drum. She could hear everything, every word, every insult. Her body ached to move, but she waited. She had to wait. Kaylin had made her promise. But when the third enforcer's footsteps thudded closer to the hatch, when she heard the panel above her shift slightly, she made her choice. The hatch burst open. She moved faster than any of them expected. The enforcer turned, too slow. She surged forward, slammed her elbow into his wrist, knocking the weapon sideways. The gun went off, harmlessly into the ceiling. The second enforcer moved. Kaylin stepped between them, grabbing his shoulder, twisting the man's arm behind his back and slamming him against the wall with brutal force. Sparks flew from the panel. The bureaucrat stumbled back. Rival stood in the center of the room now, breathing hard, hair wild, eyes burning like twin stars. "You will not take me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The silence that followed was total. Outside, a neighbor's window flicked open, then another. Boots echoed in nearby corridors. Someone leaned into the hall. A dozen unseen eyes looked out into the alley where drones now hovered low and lazy, waiting. And for the first time, people didn't look away. The bureaucrat straightened. His expression hardened. "This is a Class 3 offense. You've both just guaranteed permanent erasure." Kaylin stepped beside her. His arm didn't touch hers, but the space between them was chosen. "We're not running," he said. The enforcers didn't move. Not yet. Not with civilians watching. Someone down the corridor snapped a picture. Another raised a voice. "What's she done then? Huh? What's the charge?" The bureaucrat hesitated. Eyes shifted. The machine faltered. Rivael lifted her chin. "I said no," she called out. "That was all." More whispers. More windows opening. The wind changed. The power wasn't gone, but the fear was cracking. The bureaucrat signaled to the enforcers. "Fall back. We'll let the drones handle it." They left without a word, the door hissing shut behind them. Rival stood there, heart pounding, limbs taut. Kaylin stepped in front of her, not to protect, but to steady. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured. "Yes," she said. "I did." And for the first time, she stood in her own story, not hidden, not hunted, whole. Kaylin looked at her and knew. This was no longer about hiding. It never had been. It was about taking back what had been stolen, together. And the world, whether it was ready or not, had just heard her voice. It would not forget it again. The wind had changed. Not just in the alleyways or in the tremble of old banners flapping overhead, but in the city itself. Something subtle had shifted, like the first groan of ancient machinery waking after a long, enforced silence. A pulse, a breath. It began in whispers. A girl in Sector 12 pulled down a directive poster during curfew. No one reported her. A vendor refused to scan a bio-ID chip, pretending the reader was broken. The enforcer glared but moved on. People had started looking again, not away, at each other. It was nothing, and it was everything. Kaylin felt it even before they left the district. He saw it in the way his neighbors nodded. Brief, unsmiling, but not indifferent. He saw it in the old man who dropped off supplies at his door without a word. In the boy who handed Rivael a roll of fabric through the fence and whispered, "I liked what you said." And Rivael, once half-starved and invisible, no longer lowered her gaze when people passed. She had spoken, and the world had listened. But they couldn't stay, not after what happened. The enforcers would return, not with warnings or arrests next time, but with scorched earth orders. Drones, fire, data wipes, quiet disappearances. Kaylin had seen the system purge itself before. He knew the rhythm, so they prepared. The back of the unit had always connected to the undergrid, old access tunnels used for power conduit repairs during the war. Few people remembered them, but Kaylin had mapped them out years ago, in case he ever needed to vanish. He never imagined he wouldn't be going alone. They packed lightly, one bag each, rations, tools, identity scramblers Bren had smuggled in, a patch kit, a welding torch, a burner tablet. The night before they left, Rivael stood at the edge of the sleeping cot, holding her old cuffs in both hands. She had kept them. Clean now, no blood left, just rust and weight. She ran her fingers over the hinge, then looked up. "I want to bury them." Kaylin nodded. They found a quiet corner behind the abandoned rail station, where the soil still held life beneath the ash. She dug the hole herself, knelt in silence, and placed the cuffs inside. No ceremony, no final words. But when she stood again, she breathed differently. It wasn't over, but something had ended. They left at dawn, The city's bones stretched long behind them, twisting metal, tangled wires, forgotten towers half swallowed by vines. The air tasted cleaner out past the transit grid. Kalen walked ahead, scanning for heat signatures. Rivael moved behind him with the grace of someone who had reclaimed her body from pain. Hours passed. The tunnels widened, the air grew thinner. They climbed toward the edge of the district line, where the colony's outer zone merged with the free lands. The territory beyond was unstable, lawless, but alive, and it was theirs. When they emerged from the tunnel mouth, the sun was rising through a low, burnt orange haze. Strange birds wheeled overhead. Far in the distance, broken towers reached skyward like forgotten monuments. Rivael turned to look at him, shielding her eyes. "You ever been out here?" He shook his head. "Only in maps. It smells different. It smells free." They set up camp that night beneath the remains of a crashed satellite dish, using the wide structure as partial shelter. Kalen made a small heat core from scavenged cells. Rivael gathered scrub plants with her bare hands, the scent of wild resin clinging to her skin. Later they sat by the soft pulse of the fire unit side by side. No walls, no city, no chains. Rivael leaned into him, resting her head lightly against his shoulder. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "We make it," Kalen replied. She tilted her head to look at him. "Just like that?" "Not easy, not fast, but yes." He turned to meet her gaze. "We build it, together." A smile tugged at her lips, a real one, not shadowed by fear or pain. She reached up, touched his face. And this time, when they kissed, there was no grief hiding behind it. No rage, no urgency, only choice, only warmth, only love. Later, wrapped in the quiet of the open night, stars spinning overhead like old songs forgotten by cities, Rivael whispered, "I spent so long thinking I'd only ever be someone's sentence, their symbol, their shame." Kalen turned to her, brushing a strand of red hair behind her ear. "You're not anyone's anything," he said. "You're yours." She nodded, eyes shining with something that had once been impossible, hope. They lay there, watching the sky. No alarms came, no boots, no drones, only the wind, soft and open and endless. And when morning came, the world hadn't changed, but they had. Rivael rose with the sun and stood tall, shoulders straight, heart steady, and Kalen stood beside her, not as her savior, but her partner. Together they walked forward. Into what? They didn't know, but it was theirs, and it was enough. She had once been chained for saying no. Now she stood beside the man who taught her that yes could mean freedom, and that love, quiet, fierce, and chosen, was its own revolution. The grass was soft beneath their feet, warm from the midday sun. They had made it past the jagged ruins of the city line, past the twisted outposts where metal still remembered war. Now this place, the valley beyond the divide, was theirs, untouched, unnamed, free. A stream ran down from the ridge, cold and clean, and a wide-bellied tree leaned over the edge of the water, offering shade without walls. No patrols, no watchers, just birdsong, the whisper of wind through tall grass, and a freedom that didn't need to be explained. Rivael stood barefoot in the shallow stream, long red hair lifted by the breeze. She wore one of Kalen's old shirts, too wide, sleeves rolled, fabric soft from years of wash, but it clung to her lightly now, shaped by the sun and the way she moved. She laughed as the water splashed around her legs. It was a sound Kalen would never get tired of hearing. He sat nearby, leaning against the tree, sleeves pushed to his elbows, a smile on his lips that didn't feel foreign anymore. He watched her, not as someone watching a miracle, but a woman, his heart. "You're staring," she said, turning toward him. "You're worth staring at." She stepped out of the water, slow, graceful, the sunlight catching her skin. She crossed the grass barefoot, stopping just before him. Her violet eyes were soft now, unguarded. He reached out a hand and she came into it. Straddling his lap, she sat, their chests pressed together, her arms wrapping around his shoulders. Her forehead rested against his. Their breaths synced without trying. "I've never been seen like this before," she whispered. "Not as property, not as proof, just as me." "You're all I see," he said. Her hand touched his jaw, fingers brushing over the stubble at his chin. "Say it," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I love you, Rivael." Her eyes welled, not with sorrow but fullness. She leaned in and kissed him. It was slow, deeper than before. No longer just need or comfort. This was knowing. choosing, trusting. When she pulled back, she cupped his face in both hands. I love you, Kalen. I didn't know I could, but I do. They kissed again. This time it lasted. She shifted in his lap, their bodies aligning more naturally, his hands moving to her waist, her hips. The fabric of his shirt brushed between them, familiar, soft, but quickly unnecessary. She tugged it over her head. There was no hesitation, no shame. Only the sun warming her bare skin, the grass against her knees, and Kalen's hands, strong, reverent, touching her like she was something holy. He stood, lifting her with him, and carried her to the shade. There, on a blanket of moss and sunlight, they lay together. Fingers explored not just flesh, but memory. Mouths moved with wonder, not hunger. She traced the scars on his chest with her lips, kissed the places that had hardened over years of silence. He whispered her name like a vow, again and again. They undressed each other slowly, as if every button and buckle were a lock that only they held the key to. When they finally came together, it wasn't fast. It wasn't wild. It was real. She moved above him like breath, his hands at her waist, her spine arching with every gentle rhythm. The air was filled with quiet gasps, soft moans, shared heartbeats. Time didn't pass. It simply opened. They clung to each other through every rise, every pulse of connection, eyes never breaking, fingers tangled, skins slick with sun and devotion. And when it ended, when their bodies trembled and calmed and fell still, Rivael curled into his side, her cheek against his chest, listening to the echo of a heart she had once thought would never belong to her. He wrapped both arms around her, and they lay like that until the wind changed again. But this time, it wasn't danger riding on the breeze. It was the scent of wildflowers. It was the sound of laughter waiting. It was a future not promised but chosen, together. And as dusk fell, painting the sky in shades of violet and flame, Kalen leaned down, brushed his lips against her temple, and whispered the only words that ever mattered. You're home. And she smiled, because she was, because she always would be. The end, for now.